This is Jim Bish with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is December 30th, 2019, and I'm conducting an interview with Joe Barry in Sun City, Arizona. Joe, could you tell me what your full name is and where you were born?
My name is Joseph Barry, B-A-R-R-Y, from Chicago, Illinois, originally,
Okay, and what war did you participate in?
in the Vietnam era,
Okay.
1966 to 1970, or 69.
And did you grow up in Chicago?
Yes, I grew up in the west side of Chicago and then moved to the suburbs, to Calumet City, Illinois.
And is that where you graduated from high
And
school?
I graduated from high school at Thornton Fractional North, which is in Calumet City. Yeah.
Where, when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1964.
Okay, so 1964, what were your plans right out of high school? Did you go on to school then?
My plans were to go into school, but they were delayed by, my father got sick my senior year, and funds got really tight, and so I put off going to school and went to work at Inland Steel. And I worked in the steel mills for 1 year.
What did you do there?
I worked in whatever they told you to do. By top of the furnace, you shoveled stuff in, and the chemists would look at it and say, okay, we need 8 more shovels of this, and you throw it in there. Mm-hmm. And then, or you went down and you worked on what they called the floor, and you'd walk around and make sure the floor was clean, because when they poured steel out and whatnot, you had a lot of things flying around. Well, I like to keep all that stuff out of the way, because so people didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
And whatnot. So you cleaned up and you shoveled and you mucked the lines where they would throw the ingots down and run them back and forth to get the size they wanted. And it was an interesting year.
During that year, there was a lot of things happening politically, militarily. Tonkin Gulf incident happened in August of '64.
Yeah.
And then certainly thereafter, we had the Tonkin Gulf incident, and we had a buildup for the first Americans going into Vietnam in early '65.
And we all started marching down from Calumet City. We went down on the Illinois Central down to downtown Chicago for the draft. When you got drafted and you had your draft physical.
Did you enlist, or were you drafted?
I was it was sort of funny. When I went down to do be enlisted, or not, to be drafted, we were standing in a line of thousands of people were going through that day. And it was A was Army, Navy, Marines, and the Air Force wasn't having any drafting and whatnot, because they had filled up pretty quick and whatnot. But I had taken the test for the Illinois Department of something. It was a test that we took in our junior years that qualified you for the military, said this is what you could qualify for in the military if you got in it. Mm-hmm. And there was a defense, Illinois had a defense, if you went in the military, then you got out and you went to school in Illinois, you could qualify for cheaper costs of school. And it was Illinois Defense Initiative. And I had taken the test. So I was eligible, I was on the list of people that used to get a lot of calls from Army, Navy, Marines trying to get people in the Air Force to trying to get people to come in. And didn't think I'd need it until I became Marine. And I didn't think that was not going to be too good of a enlistment. So I had some contacts and I joined the Air Force. And I left, had my physical in December of '65, and then immediately flipped over and went into the Air Force in February of '66. And I went to Lackland Air Force Base, where we all went.
Yeah.
But we were part of the Wonder crew that went through Lackland with instead of a 6-week
Training.
they put us through in 30 days. From there, then they sent us to school because they had to fill up the ranks across the, the build up had started in Nam, and people were needed all across the world. But so we went to school rather quickly, and I went to supply school at Amarillo Air Force Base, and I've gone through Amarillo a lot of years, driving back and forth from Omaha to here.
Yeah.
And always remember that 6 months of school there in Amarillo, and then after that I got a leave and I got stationed at Panama Canal Zone, Howard Air Force Base.
So what, was there any special memories you had of basic training? Your quick 30 days?
It was a 30-day, wonder world, if you will. There were, lots of tests, to get you acclimated. You had to do the UCMJ, and you had to do the normal stuff, but you had to do it in 30 days versus 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And so we spent a lot of time at school. We would go from 6 o'clock in the morning till probably 6 or 8 o'clock at night, because we were going to school longer during the day versus doing some of the PT stuff.
Yeah.
Although they got their fair share then of that in also.
I'm sure that was tough on the instructors and everybody making their transition from 6 weeks down to 30 days.
They would let us know that they were not happy having to put up, because that meant that, if we were there doing that, they had to be there to supervise us to make sure we weren't getting out of line or everything.
Their time was compressed as well.
Yes, it was.
So from there, you went to Amarillo.
Yep, Amarillo Air Force Base.
And what are some of the things you did there? You were in supply?
I was in
That's where you
supply school. Yeah, and went to school there, and again, the school normally would be 9 months or whatever it was at the time, or before that. But we went through in 6 months. They put us through school, and that was also the time Air Force was coming out with the UNIVAC system for the supply system. So we were being trained on the supply system of the future, if you will, working with the UNIVAC, not the older card system. And so we were getting trained by people who used to do it the old way and had learned the new way and were teaching us the new way and making it all work, because you could get sent to a base that was going to transit to the new system in a year, or it could be 2 years. So you had to learn both sides. And so we learned both ways of doing the system. And I got sent to Howard Air Force Base, and it was going to be one of the first installations that they were doing overseas.
Where is Howard Air Force Base?
Howard Air Force Base in Panama Canal Zone.
Okay.
And back then it was the canal zone. We were in our little world over there. And outside of the canal was the Panama. And so we went to Howard Air Force Base, and Howard Air Force Base was a split base, Army and Air Force. On our side was we had the air base and the planes where we would, and on the other part was the 506th 506th paratroopers, where they were training them how to jump and in the jungles and whatnot. We had the planes, they had the troops, and we ran the flight line and all that kind of stuff. And that was, I was in the support group to the 605th Airborne, or 605th Air Commandos, which was one of the last of that I know of. I don't even know if that exists anymore. But the 605th Air Commandos worked and trained the Army parachutists how to work in the jungle and everything. And of course that was big time training, jungle survival school. The jungle survival school for all of the military was down in Panama. And we did that with our troops and the troops from other countries also. And the 605th did the training, if you would, and we were in support of them.
So what was your specific job in support of them? What are some of what's your day-to-day activities look like?
We would go out on the flight line, and they had all the shops for the planes. And of course, these were old planes, World War II C-47s. And the C-47s were still being used to train people how to jump out of airplanes. And so there was a lot of shops and a lot of work done, and we kept them supplied with supply. They would need something in the hydraulic shop. They'd need a new activator for the wings and everything. Well, we get it out of supply, bring it out, back and forth. We take the bad part back and send it to rehab somewhere, usually Tinker Air Force Base at that time. And then we did that. That's what we did. Probably 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And the thing about Panama was, it's sort of like being down here. We had 2 times of the year. We had a hot year, a part of the year, and then but down there it was rainy. And when the monsoon season came down there, it started raining, and it rained just like it did in Vietnam for the guys that had to put up with that. It would start raining today, and it would rain for 6 months, and then stop, and you wouldn't get any rain. But you learned, you'd walk out, when you put on a fresh uniform first thing in the morning, walk out the door, it'd be pouring rain, and you keep right on going, because you weren't going to get not wet. You were going to get wet because you had to do your job and be out in flight line and everything else.
So it sounds like it was the perfect environment for the 605 Air Commandos to be training in.
Yep.
I'm assuming they came through in a lot of waves, where they just kept cycling people
they kept cycling people through, and they'd be there for 3 months in training. The Army guys, the 605th would stay there constantly, and they worked at the school training people how to. But then the Vietnam era troops started coming back. The guys that had been there, as they called, in the stuff, and we know what that meant. They were coming back, and we had Army, and we had Marines, And as they came back from having been there, they changed what was being taught at the school to make it more real life. Excuse me.
Were they, go ahead,
Excuse me, I don't know.
that's fine.
Ooh, that's your stuff. Sorry.
Were they, why were people coming that had already been in the field coming back? Were they just for better training?
To do better training, to teach, so if a guy, back in the day, it wasn't like World War II, where when the troops went over, they went over. They didn't come back and back, you weren't there for 1 year. You were there
For the entire,
for the
yeah,
duration.
duration.
But now, the guys were going over for 1 year tour and coming back. When they came back, the gunnery sergeants and everybody else, they were signed to somewhere, and a bunch of them were sent to train, to upgrade the school, because the guys were getting shot up because they weren't trained enough how to deal with jungle, with a real jungle fighter. But these guys brought their skills back, and so the gunnery sergeants from the gunnies from the Marines, and the what was it? The Army
Special forces people.
yeah, the Special Forces and the Green Berets, they came down, reset the school up to be more realistic for what was going on in Vietnam. And the school became vital to a lot of, everybody that they could, they ran through the school for at least 3 months before they sent them over. But as you know, things started moving rather quickly, and pretty soon the school was being turned over in 6 weeks. And those guys, a lot of people probably needed more training, but
Yeah.
we didn't have time.
At least you had more real life training during that time period.
Yeah.
Were they servicing schools for both, for Air Force, Army, and for Marine?
And everybody that was going over there that they could handle, they were going there. They were also being trained, I believe, some training was being done near Eglin Air Force Base. There's an Army base down there too, but I can't remember what it was. A little bit of guys trained out in Fort Polk, near Fort Polk, but those were infantry. But if they were going through if they were paratroopers, they were being trained through the school down there.
I'm assuming this was the only school that we had of this type of jungle training.
It's the only jungle training school I know of at the time.
I'm sure being location, it was
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh yeah, it was this great school for the purpose, and the jungle was there. It was definitely there.
And you were primarily in support of the aircraft?
Yeah, the aircraft and the.
Did you support
the guys
Marine
who were-
aircraft, Army aircraft, and Air Force?
Anybody that came into the
Anybody?
Air Force Base, anyone landed at Howard Air Force Base was taken care of by us. Yeah, we had. In addition, we also had troops from Brazil throughout our allies, if you would. We also trained their military. There was an officer school on the other on the other side of the canal that trained military officers for all of our allies in Central America and South America. It was the Academy it was an academy for military officers. And of course, that was run by our military.
Right.
And it would be Marines and Army officers training their Army officers. And
Always using American equipment, Air Force equipment,
Yep.
and Army equipment.
Yep. And, you know, the latest and greatest planes at the time were the F-4 and the F-105? Yeah, 105 was a bigger plane, and the F-4, which was the daddy of them all
Yeah.
back in that day.
Did you service did they learn flight cargo planes come through there as
Oh
well?
yeah, we had C-130s. We had primarily C-130s, although we still had some C-54s, C-54s, C-130s, C-120, 123s, 123s, and of course we were still dealing with all of the C-130s, or C-47s. We made do with the C-47, which was a great plane for what was going on in Vietnam, because it could go into the jungle fields that they built, and they would go in and build a field, and they could use, but you couldn't build it for our what was it, the liftmaster at the time was a it was a huge plane, C5, C5A, something like that, big plane. Well, they could use that at Tonsanute and stuff like that, but out in the hinterland, you C-47s and C-47s, the C-54s were probably the planes that brought them, you know, then you had the smaller planes, but we didn't have much to do with them.
Yeah. So while you were there, was there any special incidents that took place, or any certain memories or strange events that you can recall?
Well, it was a time of change. You know, there was a lot of things going on. The 605th Air Commandos, which we supported, their job was to fly in, ostensibly, and where there was no air base, they would fly in, be dropped into the zone, put an airplane, put down in the grass, and land planes within 2 days.
So they had all those portable runways that they pieced together?
Yeah, they had all that stuff, and they'd drop it in the ground and then lay it out, and and we were sitting there one day, and all of a sudden they called them up, and they had the whole unit. There was about 2,500 people and whatnot, and of course we were support, and they put us all on the flat line and said, planes are coming to get us, we're going over. We're going over to Vietnam. We're going to set up bases along the between Vietnam and Thailand. They were going to put up bases, 3 or 4, and then 2 or 3 along the north and south border, and we were going to put these in, you know. And we stood on the flight line for 3 days while they said, well, we're going, no, we're not, no, we are, no, we're not, typical military. And then it went away. We went back to day-to-day living. And then we became part of the 21st, as they built up the Air Force during that time, we became part of the 21st Air Group, which became responsible for everything south of the border, so to speak, at the time. And then by that time, it was time for me to go, so they shipped me back. I got to stay in Panama, though. Normally, you were there for about a 18-month tour, and they didn't have a replacement for me. The newly had gotten through school and ready to come over to Panama. They didn't have any replacement, so I was there for an extra 3-4 months. So it was fine. I mean, beautiful duty. You could go off base to Panama City. You could go to all over Central America in a jitney and a little bus and whatnot. And when you had some time, and you get have a good old time, and we did.
You were there a little over a year and 3 months, 3 or 4 months,
No,
something like that?
I was there then for almost 21, 22 months.
Okay, just short of, couple,
Yeah,
3
yeah.
months short of 2 years.
Yeah, and then with my schooling and all that stuff being carried over, when I got back to when I did get back to the States, I got to Westover Air Force Base, and 9 months later they tried to give me orders to go to Vietnam because they needed people over there, but I only had at that time 10 months left in the service, and they said, well, you have to extend for 3 months or 4 months, add your time for your leave before you go and that type of stuff, and there was going to be some training, and they said, well, we'll have to extend you for 6. I say, no, catch-22, I'm not extending. And I got out.
So did that extension in Panama helped you out then? Because
got
it
it.
extended your time later.
Yeah. So I didn't go to Vietnam. I did not.
When you were in Panama and through the school there, all these guys that were coming in and then leaving, did they go directly to Vietnam from there, or were they going to the States first and then leaving?
They'd get leave and go. So their orders would be go on leave and then go to probably at the time you went to San Francisco or LA or one of the military bases out that way, and they flew you over. The hop was over to Philippines, from Philippines into Nam, and then you did your time.
Yeah. So most of them went back on leave.
Yeah.
Did what they needed to do, and then they had their dates to report to get ready to go to Vietnam. So when you got out of Vietnam,
I didn't get into Nam.
I mean, when you got out of Panama, excuse me.
Yeah.
When you got out of Panama, you came back. You were at what base? Did you say?
Westover Air Force Base.
Okay. And what were you doing at Westover? Just waiting for them to make a decision on what you were doing?
No, I was assigned to, when I got back, assigned to the 1805th support group for the AFCS headquarters at Westover Air Force Base, which was connected to all of the installations throughout the upper East Coast down to Washington, D.C. The headquarters for communications was at Westover Air Force Base, along with the 5th Air Force bombers for Vietnam. The B-52s flew out of Westover Air Force Base at the time.
8th Air Force, wasn't it?
8th Air Force?
Yes.
Whatever. One of them.
And if you would have gone to Vietnam, would you been doing the same job you were doing in Panama, dealing with that, or did you know?
I would have done that. Plus, I was supposed to have a second MOS for ground radio, and I very rarely used it when I was in Panama, except for some training times. But most of my time was in supply.
Was that your original MOS in supply?
Yeah, supply, yeah. But, you know.
Did you get the MOS as you went to Amarillo to supply school, or was that afterwards you came out?
That was the same, we had, both schools were at Amarillo.
Okay, for radio and supply.
Yeah, yeah.
So did
And-
most of the people coming out of there have both first and secondary MOSs?
In the group I was with, yes, we had both and whatnot. And the majority of guys in my unit left Panama, that left Amarillo, went to units in Europe, Philippines, and some of the guys did end up in Nam. But when they went over there, they were using their ground radio skills more than their supply skills.
Right. A lot of the supply, which was recovery aircraft, doing whatever you need to
Yeah.
aircraft, were actually in support zones that were away from Vietnam. It
Yeah.
sounds like that's where most of your guys ended up.
Yes,
But radio was a different story.
yes, yes, it was.
So when you were at Westover Air Force Base, then you were what were the variety of things you were doing there?
Well, it was sort of crazy because we were a support group. There was we had 5 of us we had 2 clerks. We had a commander of the support squadron, and we had 4 guys in supply, all Air Force veterans, if you will, military. Most of them guys had 20 years, 20 years in. The other 3 guys, so I was low man on the totem pole, but they had problems with their military bearing. They drank a lot, and they were sent to the squadron to be hopefully rehabilitated and whatnot. And but then the guy that was really in charge of everything was a chief master sergeant, had been in for, I don't know, Sergeant McCool was a chief master sergeant, and he'd been in since the end of World War II, and Berlin airlift and all this kind of stuff. And he was he lived at the 5th Air Force or 8th Air Force, whatever. It was 8th Air Force, yes. He had been in the 8th Air Force for years and years and years, and he was when he was Westmoreland's chief NCIOC for Nam when Westmoreland was over there.
Okay.
Then he got back to the States, and he was supposed to just fill out his time to retirement, to his 40 years or whatever it was at the time. And he had a heart attack. And orders came down, so I became the first sergeant for the headquarters squadron, because these other sergeants were being disciplined, so they weren't. So I became the first sergeant for, I don't know, 2 months while McCool was in rehab and whatnot. And then he came back, and he was a great gentleman. Matter of fact, he was got Ruthie down the aisle for when we got married.
What was his name?
Chief Master Sergeant Hugh McCool, MCCOOL. Chief Master Sergeant Hugh McCool.
So,
He was something.
when you were there, you said they were dealing with you, whether they were trying to send you to Vietnam.
Yeah,
And this was all at Westover.
Yeah,
when all that
Westover,
was going on. How did you finally? And I'm assuming this is 1969.
This would have been like, I got out in December, and they would have tried to hand me orders in think it was February. February of February of '69 is when they were going to give me orders.
So how, could you explain how that process works? Because
we had-
a lot of people have a lot of different things on how they exit,
Yeah.
and some controversy with orders at the
Yeah.
end. So, what you remember, what happened as far as how you exited the Air Force and
Well,
didn't end up in Vietnam?
it was like, you know, they came, the lady who was the head of human resources at the time, Major, I forget what her name was. Anyway, she personally came up to hand me this paperwork saying, okay, here's your orders. You're gonna get, you know. And I said, you know, what's this about? And okay, it's time, but you got to sign this for a 6-month extension for because I was going to get my leave, do a little training at I forget what base, and then just, you know, go over to now. And I looked at her and I said, Major, I said, I'm not signing this. And so Sergeant McCool was back at the time, and she started to say, you have to, and he said, no, he doesn't. He, you know, doesn't have to sign for an extension. And he said, she said, well, we'll just have to. She left, came back. Actually, she didn't come back. A lieutenant came back and said, well, you're just going to end up staying here till your time's up. Okay, fine and dandy. I had my job and whatnot. And at that time, Ruth and I started dating already, and so I was perfectly content. My intent was to stay and do my time anyway, so I wasn't going to jump ship, so to speak. But I was doing my job and did it till then because the Air Force needed, I don't know, what did they call it? They gave me a three month early out. So instead of getting to February of 1970, going to February 70, I got out in December of '69. December 8th. I remember it because I remember talking to my dad, and he said, you're getting out on December 8th. He said, that's the day after Pearl Harbor. I said, well, we're not Pearl Harbor, Dad, so, I'm getting out. And we then turned around and left for Westover Air Force Base and drove down to where Lamar, Missouri, where Ruth Lee was from. And then I had a job interview in 2 job offers in Kansas City. One of them started immediately, and one started 2 months after some training. 2 months, and then I was going to go to training with Waddell and Reed. And this present job was right here, Texaco. I said, okay, I'm going to be going to school anyway. Here's a job here, or 2 months from now. No, I need that job.
Did your Air Force service aid you in any of your jobs after?
Well, it got
time
me.
period?
Yeah, I think it did. From the standpoint of view of when I went to the interviews, I was given the respect of a veteran, and I thought the people I talked to were veterans or had been veterans and had worked with veterans, and I think they were and we were Midwestern. We weren't West Coast or East Coast elite people that seem to have a little bigger problem about the war. And that really didn't stick in anybody, in my mind, as a problem. When I came back from overseas, from Panama, yeah, they told us to take your uniform off once we got off the military plane from Panama to Charleston, South Carolina. Before we got on across the airport, we changed into civvies. But you were going through an airport with high cut
Your haircut.
you know, you had a walk, you had a little bag that said, you know, military, you know, if you had to carry across the airport, you had your duffel bag, you know, so it sort of looked like you were in the military, you know, even though you were trying to, I don't know, hide it. But there wasn't as much problem at Charleston, South Carolina, as guys had later on in Nam, in California, coming back from Nam, and whatnot.
Well, is there any other things, we'll be wrapping this up, but is there any other things that you can think of that was interesting or different that brings back to your memory of your service during that time period?
I think there were two things that I'll never forget. Number one, I got my education all the way through almost my master's on the GI Bill that we had at the time. I never paid for a book, never had paid for a class. Everything was paid for, you know. I had put the work in, but you know, that was there. And it was one of the things that Sergeant McCool would always talk about with all of us, any of the guys that were getting out. Take advantage of your GI Bill. Make something of yourself. And that's what I did.
That was good advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use what you have. What was the second thing?
Well, the second thing was, you know, I came from Chicago, and sort of a metropolitan area, but you know, you got involved in things and you did and whatnot, and you saw a part of the world that was different than the U.S., so to speak, when I was over there. It was eye-opening. And, you know, you talk to anybody that's has gone and lived as a soldier, or one of the guys that's been in this stuff, they all got stories about what an eye-opener it was when you talked about coming back to the big PX. You know, U.S. was the best in the world, and everybody else doesn't live like that. And that's why there's so many people trying to come today across the borders to live here. And I know why, because I saw it.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for your interview.
Thank you.